Welcome back to another episode of the Kevin O'Connor Show. Joining me today is my good friend and the amazing Jason Timpf from Hoops Tonight. Jason, what up, man? How you doing? What a night of basketball.
Yeah, it's good to see you. I was joking with you before we started recording that you have now inspired me to watch more college hoops and to dig into the draft a little earlier than I usually do every year. I always come up with excuses to not watch college hoops just because the NBA can be such a grind. And I was thankful that you got me on board. I watched the Final Four in its entirety. It made it kind of a little respite from the NBA. And that was a crazy game. Literally came down to just a couple of plays there at the end, and I kind of feel bad for Emmanuel Sharp. I'm sure he's beating himself up there a little bit.
Oh, my God. I mean, it was a crazy weekend. The Final Four certainly delivered with 4 number 1 seeds. Florida-Auburn was a great game on Saturday. Houston-Duke was an amazing and a shocking game on Saturday. We'll talk about the losers in the Final Four a little bit later. I want to start out with what happened on Monday night between the Gators and the Cougars. Florida won that game 65-63, barely led it all throughout the game at all. They led 8-6 in the first half and then not again until it was 64-62 in the closing minutes of the game. I want to go through some of the prospects with you, Jason, because as an NBA guy, you watch so many NBA games. I feel like you would have a unique perspective on some of these college prospects on all 4 teams in the Final Four. And with Florida in particular, Walter Clayton in this game doesn't score at all in the first half. Ball slipping out of his hands, turnovers, just looking like a mess out there after he was the biggest riser. You got Jay Williams on ESPN comparing him to Stephen Curry and Damian Lillard. People saying he should be a lottery pick. He rose on my board from the 50s until number 30. Like, the dude's been incredible. And then he doesn't score until 14:57 in the second half. Doesn't hit his first field goal until 7:54 in the second half. Then he hits a huge three to tie it at 60 with 3 minutes left. And then in the final moments of the game, to cause that, turnover by Sharp, he makes this amazing closeout. He had 7 assists in the game, played good attentive defense. I thought despite him not scoring well, he made one of the biggest plays of the game, and he was solid overall despite not getting buckets as he usually does.
Yeah, you could tell that Houston's game plan early on was anybody but Clayton, and the blitzes were causing him to rush a little bit, to make some mistakes. I thought that Condon struggled a little bit on the short roll to start the game. He got better as the game progressed. But in the second half, he just focused on finding ways to make plays. And there were just all these little things. It was the defending and switches, which I really thought was the story of the game in the second half for Florida, was just the job that not just Clayton, but their bigs did on switches in space, guarding, tougher pull-up shooters, guards that can move their feet, funneling drives towards the baseline and not letting them go, right up against them. I thought there was just a lot of really good defense on an island in that second half. And then just the little transition push for the and one. Oh, you randomly switch a screen instead of blitzing. Well, I'm going to get to my pull-up jumper here. Loved that little horn set they ran to get him that 3 coming off of the action where they faked him as the front half of a double screen and then have him come off of a separate double screen. That was where he got that clean look a little bit earlier in crunch time. And again, it's so much of this is like floor games. So much of this is just don't make mistakes. And he didn't make mistakes down the stretch. And those Emmanuel Sharp plays we talked about, the strip on the leg out of bounds, he's going in kind of a straight line parallel to the sideline. He's not really threatening the basket as he's driving down kind of that slot at the block extended. And he just tried to force a drive that wasn't there. That was a big mistake. The, not reading the closeout from Clayton as he was coming off of that last little double screen action in the final possession. So much of that job is just the floor game. And aside from that one blitz where he rifled the ball out of bounds on the hook pass out of bounds, I thought Clayton did a good job of avoiding mistakes and keeping them in their offense in the second half. And I thought that was the key. And then from there, just the little transition pushes and playing off of their defense ended up being enough to get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I thought this was a good example of, for an NBA team, what you might be hoping for. Because with Clayton, the reason why, somebody responded to me on social, they're like, how is this guy ranked so low? like when he's such a talented scorer, such a talented bucket getter. And tonight, the playmaking, he had some sloppy turnovers, but the playmaking, he was good passing the ball out there despite not scoring. How is he ranked so low is the question. Well, it's because, he's been an aloof defender throughout his college career. He makes a lot of mistakes offensively. We saw some of the bad passing in this game against Houston as well. As you said, when he just whipped the ball across the floor, nobody's there. We see some mistakes. But in the biggest game of his life, when he's not scoring, he did positively impact the game in other ways. So, I think it does say something for when you're projecting him forward in the NBA for what you can expect from him, because he's not going to score 25, 30 points or 34 points as he did against Auburn on Saturday every single night. You're going to have other stuff from him. And I thought it was encouraging that he showed that in the biggest game of his life. And, you mentioned that play where Sharp got stripped by Will Richard. Will Richard in this game ultimately is what kept Florida in it in the first half. Will Richard is their other guard, 6'4". He had 14 points in the first half. Throughout the game, he also grabbed 8 rebounds as a 6'4" guard. And then in the biggest defensive possession of the game for Florida before the final one, he just makes a great dig at the ball. Just a perfect play to strip that away from Sharp. And man, tough for Sharp, man, down the stretch of that game. You get stripped on the drive, and then that final possession. But man, it's gonna be hard to get over that one, man. That's tough.
Yeah, I thought Will Richard was kind of like the emotional leader for Florida in this game. You could tell he was the guy that was kind of like when they were starting to teeter a little bit in that early second half run. He was the guy that was kind of trying to get them together, get them focused, keep them, taking it one possession at a time.
Yeah, the first recruit. Golden, the Florida head coach, he was his first recruit.
Mm-hmm. It's one of those things where that sort of thing, when you get into these big games, they're so uncomfortable. Everyone's out of their element, whether it's the different type of gym and the optics there, whether it's the change in the way your game day flow goes because you have more media responsibilities or the halftime is longer or whatever it might be. There's all these little things that get a little bit disorienting in those settings. And you need to have your people that are your engines in terms of the motor of the team and in the mentality of the team. And I thought Richard did a really nice job with that. But again, it's sad, but in single elimination, it comes down to sometimes just one or two decisions. And I thought Sharp just made 2 bad reads. I thought he forced a drive through a lane that wouldn't, even if he gets through that, let's say that Richard doesn't get his hand on the ball there and he gets through that gap. He's not doing anything.
He's not going
if he
anywhere.
Gets to that spot along the short corner there. It's just a bad read. And then again, he's cutting off of a double screen off of the right or off of the left block there on that final possession. He's got clear view of the clock from the other side of the court. He can look and see, I've got 5 seconds here. I can throw a shot fake. And he just telegraphed it and put himself in a tough spot. And it's just really unfortunate because, again, in a game like that, it just comes down to 1 or 2 decisions, 1 or 2 free throws, 1 or 2 misses here or there. Even just that transition push for the foul. I can't remember who it was that got it in the final. Was it Elijah Martin? I can't remember who got that last
Elijah Martin,
little foul. Yeah, the last drive along the transition break on the left side of the floor when he drawed that foul. It just comes down to a handful of things, but that's what makes college hoops so exciting. Is it's a little uglier. You and I were texting during the game. It's a lot of struggling to make shots in traffic around the rim. A lot of pull up jump shots that aren't as close to the going in as we see from the highest quality shot makers in the NBA, but you just get that unrelenting intensity. I was actually thinking during the game, a lot of the same reasons why that game was ugly is why NBA playoff basketball gets ugly. When you start really rotating and really showing on every screen and really putting your body on the line on every single rebound, the game just gets extremely difficult for everybody, even the best players in the world. And I mean, we've seen, LeBron and Steph play an incredibly ugly fourth quarter in a game 7 in an NBA finals back in 2016. That's just what high stakes basketball looks like.
And that's what makes it so exciting from a fan standpoint, because you see these guys all year long. It's a lot of high scoring, big scoring games. Sometimes, if people complaining, NBA teams don't play defense, even though that's not true. It's not true with the nature of the game nowadays. But then in the playoffs, as you said, this is where teams are game planning. They have a singular focus on one opponent. They're scouting tendencies. Everything is being scouted. And then the intensity on the floor, it's just full throttle, start to finish in these games. You know, even like the mistakes, like sometimes I know he gets Chinny Lou gets called for a technical for bouncing the ball. Like you got to keep your composure, but at the same time, it's understandable that like you're feeling this intensity when you made a great defensive play and you got whistled for it. That's just the nature of these games, and that's what makes it so fun to watch these. Even if you're not a college guy, this is still just great basketball, period.
I thought they handled it well too, because like he got the short end of the stick on that one. The game plan, they're trying to keep Juwan Roberts from getting to his left hand. He does that like over the top rip and almost like hits him in the face with his elbows. And he does his job. He slides his feet, gets there, gets that right hand out. I thought he got a relatively clean contest on the shot at the rim. There was all sorts of contact on rim attempts that entire game that was getting uncalled, and then suddenly you get that call there, and it's like it's like literally 4 free throw attempts for good defense. Like crazy. I don't blame him for being upset, but that's just how it goes sometimes. And I will tell you, Kevin, I complain about NBA officiating all the time. Watching that game was another reminder for me that it can always be worse.
I know.
It can always be worse.
I mean, the thing that, on the note of officiating, I thought it was funny. I think it was out of bounds on Tugler, if I remember correctly. And we saw the replay, and instantly, it's like, okay, clearly it was out on Houston. We know this before the referee even announces. We were reviewing the call on the court. We know already. You don't have a mechanism in the year 2025 to notice, like just alert the referees. Hey, you got it right, guys. You don't need to pull out a small screen, pull out your reading glasses, and watch it on the sideline. We know already. You guys got that one right. You did it.
I've never asked you this before, but are you an Elam Ending fan?
I'm intrigued by it. I think target score, I mean, it can create new issues, but I'm intrigued by how it can remove that free throw contest aspect of some endgame situations.
The free throw contest and the reviews. It's crazy that you have these amazing, highly entertaining games that just grind to a halt at the end. And that's part of it that drives me crazy. But anyway.
So you're pro target score, Elam Ending.
I understand why it will never happen, to be clear, but I legitimately think it would make for an incredible NBA product. I think it would be incredible. Can you imagine NBA games where it's next basket wins?
Drag. Oh, I know. Oh, yeah. Crazy.
Every next basket, we get like 1 or 2 of them a week in the regular season, and every one of them would just be incredible television. I still think that Giannis versus LeBron All-Star game is one of my favorite like moments as a fan. It was like watching LeBron and Giannis show down the stretch of that game.
I'd like to see the NBA experiment with it. You know, maybe not NBA Cup games, but G League. Why not experiment for a portion of the G League season? I mean, like if they've always used the G League to experiment and use target score for a period of G League games, remove the 3-point corners for a period of G League games. And I know G League is also for development for players and for scouting for NBA franchises, but hey, you know, you can use it for a little bit of experimentation too for a portion of the season. And the thing is, with this game between Florida and Houston, this is a game that there were no 5-star recruits on either team. And so a lot of these guys, there really aren't that many first-round picks. Clayton could become a first-round pick. Alex Condon, who had a really rough first half for Florida, still could be a first-round pick, even though I think he should take another year in school. Uzan from Houston, again, not a great game for him offensively, but there's a chance he could slip into the late first round. JoJo Tugler, not a first rounder, more like a second rounder because he's so incredible defensively, fouled out of the game for Houston tonight. A lot of these guys are going to be playing in the G League. Like, that's just the reality of it. A lot of these guys are going to be getting G League opportunities in the years to come. Who stood out to you? You know, like you're watching from an NBA side of things. Like, is there a player that stood out to you where you're thinking, okay, I think this guy's got a shot to be an NBA guy long term?
Clayton's just the obvious answer. Looking at the Final Four in its entirety, it's specific. Like, I think one of the most valuable traits in the NBA right now is not just shooting, but mobile shooting, whether that's shooting on the move coming off of screening action or it's shooting off of the dribble in screening action. I think that is the fundamental concept that allows you to bring two to the ball in screening action. And that is like kind of a baseline element to running successful offense without a superstar, right? Or with a superstar, it's the same sort of thing. But like, if you can somehow generate 4-on-3s or 2-on-1s or any sort of advantage with a bench group, then you can at least play basketball off of that. A classic example for me is like Isaiah Hartenstein with the Thunder. Just his ability to throw backdoor passes makes things easier for the Thunder offense because they get 4-on-3s and rotation situations out of it. Just having Clayton be able to come off of a screen to his right and to his left out of a sprint and rise up and shoot, both off the dribble or off of the run, off the ball, is a foundational talent that you can build a legitimate bench guard role out of. Because now you can have him running off of action, use it as a means with which to generate pocket passes and skip passes against a low man to where you can play some advantage basketball. I've long held the belief that NBA role players generally look as good as they're going to look based on the advantages you create for them. And so, that's one of those things. There's a lot of guys in this league that would come flying off a screen that you'd live with the results. And I mean, you saw tonight from Houston's game plan, just how they felt about letting Clayton come off free and clear out of those screens. I mean, the movement shooting with him, I think, is the piece that elevates him from the rest.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think I kind of had an awakening with him throughout the tournament with some of the types of shots that he was hitting, including in their game against Auburn on Saturday. They beat Auburn 79-73. Walter Clayton had 34 points in that game, including some big ones as he had throughout the tournament. Thomas Hawk had a big game for them as well. I don't quite think he should declare for the draft necessarily, but he is a future future draft pick for sure. At some point, probably second round pick. On the Auburn side of that, Janai Broom, 15 points in his final game there. He's probably a second round prospect. Tahad Pettiford came off the bench for Auburn. I have him ranked as a first round. A lot of people have him as a early second round pick, mid second round pick. Had 7 points on 6 shots. Was not a great game for Pettiford. On the Auburn side of things of that Saturday game, Jason, did Pettiford or Denver Jones or Janai Broom, anybody stand out to you as a future NBA player?
Janai Broom strikes me as your classic college post player that probably won't be able to play too much in the NBA. A little too slow-footed, not able to do too much in the way of shot making other than just overpowering guys. It's so funny. I was watching Todd Pettiford.
He just needs the three, yeah. Jason. That's he needs his three to develop, and it hasn't in years in college.
Yep, and it's just one of those things where you don't foresee him being able to have enough of an advantage to be able to succeed in the NBA without that piece. It's so funny with Tahad Pettiford. I literally was watching him, and I was literally like, this dude just looks like a New York guard to me. And I immediately looked him up, and he was from New Jersey. And I was like, there's just like a flair you see with guards that are from the Northeast. There's just something in the way that they sit in that high hesitation dribble, and everything's got that pop to it. And I really enjoyed watching. You could tell he was a huge Brandon Jennings fan too. I haven't watched any interviews of him, but I'm sure it's a name he's brought up from time to time. But as it is with all the, honestly, when you sent me this list of guys, the hardest thing is there's just so many guards in college basketball that can hit a pull-up jump shot coming off of a screen, and it's hard to find the things that separate. It's usually size, whether it's Con Knippel and his ability to put guys in jail and use his physical size, or it's Tyrese Proctor being a little taller, that sort of thing. Those sorts of things end up being the differentiators. But Todd Pettiford, it just struck me as that classic herky jerky start stop quickness upper Northeast guard. And I feel like there's always room for that sort of thing as long as you can account for him elsewhere on the floor with size and athleticism and things along those lines.
Yeah. I mean, I still like Pettiford a lot. It was a rough potential last game for him. He did declare for the draft while retaining his college eligibility, which is the thing you're going to hear with a lot of these guys that declare for the draft this year, because the promise of returning to school for a bag of NIL money is there. If you're not going to be a top 20 pick, a lot of these guys are going to say, you know what? I'll go back to school and play another year there and try to be a top 20 or a lottery guy next year, because that's where the real life-changing money is, not in the second round, not with two-way deals. If that's
do you think that's good for the NBA?
Yeah,
do you think that's good for the NBA?
I do. I think NBA teams would prefer these guys stay in school longer because it gives you more time to evaluate what they will be moving forward. Now, if that's an advantage for some teams, I think there are other teams that would prefer to get these guys for the cheap. Like if they feel like there's a guy who would be a lottery pick in 2 years and you can get them at pick 40, sure, they'd rather that guy enter the NBA right away. And that's what's going to be interesting with this year's draft, because you look at some of those picks in the 20s, in the 30s this year, like Boston at 28, the Clippers at 30, or the Pacers at 24, the Celtics at 32, the Wolves at 31, the Sixers, if they do fix themselves, at 35. Like some of these winning teams, I see a world in which they offer, a guarantee to some of these prospects. Like, hey, we will take you here because we see you fitting into our team year one. And, pick 28 or pick 30 for the Celtics or Clippers, get a guaranteed deal for a guy who you go back to school. Maybe you don't actually improve your stock much, but you decide to go to a winning organization right now that's giving you a guarantee in the late first round. Maybe the guy ends up going. But I think a lot of those other teams surrounding them, Brooklyn rebuilding team, the Jazz, the Hornets, a lot of teams are rebuilding in the 20s and the 30s because of how many picks have been traded. But there are a couple of teams that are contending for titles that I could see them trying to guarantee some of those guys in the late first round. And, for Houston, I don't think there's really many guys, besides maybe Uzan, that fall into that. Auburn, Pettiford, I'd say falls into that. Florida, Clayton has probably played himself more to the middle of the first round. But with Duke, they have 3 lottery picks: Cooper Flag, Con Knipple, Kaman Malawach. We'll talk about Malawach in a minute, but someone like Tyrese Proctor, Sion James, even though like those games, that game didn't go well for them against Houston. Proctor just looked like a deer in the headlights with the ball in his hands. Sion James couldn't inbound the ball. I can't imagine those guys are going to be late first rounders. I think you could argue Proctor should go back for his senior year. Sion James was a 5th-year senior, so he will have to declare. I still remain shocked that Duke actually lost, that we weren't watching Duke in the finale on Monday. I cannot believe they lost that game. I can't.
I had to go back and watch it on Synergy because I turned it off after I thought Duke had won. I was watching it at my brother-in-law was having an event for his job, and I went and I was just like huddled in front of the TV watching. I thought that thing was over when I got out of there.
Time to go spend time with my friends and family.
I like Sion James because he kind of strikes me as an archetype of player that has had a good amount of success recently in the NBA, which is like the shorter, stockier wing defender kind of archetype, and he can knock down shots. I think that's the kind of player that serves a purpose in the modern NBA against switching when you need to have sturdier guards to be able to handle bigger, stronger players. Tyrese Proctor, like we talked about, he almost reminds me a little bit of Julian Strawther in that just kind of the way, his like vibe when he's coming off of screens. But yeah, I'm with you. I don't think either of those two look like a stereotypical first round type of talent.
Did Malawach look like a lottery pick to you? No rebounds, dude. 7'2".
I told you before the show that the hardest thing for me to scout in a small sample when I get into my draft stuff is defense. And so I'm going to leave the floor to you to plead the case that there might be more defensive upside. But when I watched him, he looked like a slow-footed big that didn't look comfortable catching and finishing in traffic and looked like he shied away from physicality. And that to me is like a death sentence at that position in the NBA, especially when you're not as fast as he is.
Well, we've seen flashes of him switching on the perimeter. And, it looks appealing at 7'2" with his ability to move his feet on the outside. But that game against Houston has me questioning a lot of things, Jason. I mean, Knipple, I think, he had a good game. He looks ready. Cooper Flag, we know what Cooper Flagg can do. He just needs to improve some of the left-handed finishing. But with Malawach, no rebounds when rebounding has really been an issue for him all year, but then no rebounds in the biggest game of your life against the most, NBA quality level length and versatility and toughness that he's seen all season with what Houston presented with Tugler and Roberts and Francis and everybody on that team, even the guard, Sharp and Cryer and Uzan, like a lot of tough guys on that roster. And he doesn't grab a rebound. And as you said, he did not look like he could compete physically against some of those bigs on Houston. He looked, if you're just watching this single game, he looked like a guy that needs another year in school, which shouldn't come as a big surprise because he hasn't played basketball for very long in his life. But man, like it was ugly. I mean, the at-rim finishing was bad in that game as well for him. But, he's an 80+% guy for the course of the season, rolling to the basket. He's a lob catcher. He has good touch from the free throw line, 75+%. He has a right-handed and a left-handed hook shot. He's flashed a three-point jumper. So, maybe this is Mo Bamba 2.0 for me. And a lot of people. But I think there's something there with him. He's just so incredibly raw, and Houston really showed how raw he is. And it wouldn't surprise me if this game, in the eyes of a lot of NBA teams, does lead to his draft stock lowering from not top 5, but more like maybe top 10.
Where did you have him on your list?
I think started him at 6 and had him at 5, I think, in the last one, if I remember correctly off the top of my head. Might end up a little lower when we update this week.
I don't blame. I mean, you made such a simple and clear case for why he would be valued in the NBA. Like the idea of being able to switch onto the perimeter, but also being dropped. I think that's arguably the most important foundational ability for a center in the NBA is to be able to defend in a switch, but also be able to defend in a drop. And that sort of scheme flexibility just gives you so much more that you can go to over the course of 82 games. But again, it just doesn't matter if the catching and finishing or the rebounding doesn't translate as the physicality ratchets up, because inevitably that's what's going to happen when you play good teams. And we've just seen so many examples over the years of teams just opting to go with another forward instead of a center if they don't trust that guy. And so, to your point, I don't think you use a high lottery pick on a player like that unless you feel pretty confident that he's going to turn into a guy that can start games for you at the center position.
Is there a team on the lottery that you think should gamble on him? Like Philly, dealing with the Embiid injury at 5, or maybe, I don't know.
What about the Pelicans?
The Pelicans, I mean, at 4, maybe if they fall out of the 4 spot, New Orleans would be interesting for him. I agree. And with New Orleans, there's no clear-cut guy that makes total sense for them with this year's draft class at number 4. And same thing for Charlotte at number 3. I don't know what they're going to do with the center position. They already traded Mark Williams. I wouldn't rule them out trading him again. But if they fall to 6, which is you don't want that to happen if you're the Charlotte Hornets. You don't want to fall, but you might fall. It could happen.
What if Brooklyn moves Claxton this summer? Do you think Brooklyn would go after a guy like him?
Yeah, maybe. But I think Brooklyn's an interesting team because they have so many picks in this year's draft class. I kind of wonder if they're going to end up consolidating to move up. And so I can't see them consolidating to move up for Malawach, because with Brooklyn, currently they have 6, 18, 26, 27, and 36. So they have 5 picks in the top 36. They're not going to make 5 picks, unless they're getting multiple drafting stashes. I'd imagine they're going to consolidate some of those. And with this year's class, the interesting thing is, I'll be, talking about this a lot more in the months to come. But if you're a fan listening to this show, or you're a fan of Houston, Utah, Washington, Charlotte, and you don't end up number 1, but you end up number 3, I could definitely see a world in which you trade down, because Ace Bailey's not a perfect fit everywhere. A lot of teams already have point guards, so they might not want Dylan Harper. So a team like Brooklyn, maybe they're able to ship, future picks and this year's picks and move up into the top top 3, not for Cooper Flagg, but for Ace Bailey or for Dylan Harper or the guy that they want at number 4. So, I mean, we'll see how this draft shakes out. But, the Final Four was awesome, man. We saw a lot of great prospects. We saw some lottery guys. Didn't end the way you could have hoped for Cooper. But, man, that was crazy. I can't believe they blew that. Are you surprised the Flagg shot didn't go down, the turnaround at the elbow, Jason?
Oh man, I'm just sad that he left it short. That's the one thing. Like I like, because it just, you gotta. Yeah, oh man, I like that little right shoulder fade or I think the little fade in the lane for those sorts of big forwards. You remove the refs from the equation if you go to the basket and you get fouled. It's a size advantage. It's a shot that you feel like he can hit a high percentage of the time when he's that close to the rim. He just left it a little short. But I'll just, I know we didn't talk much about Cooper Flagg. I will say that I was generally just super impressed. Set aside the obvious comp stuff, like everyone's talked about, how he kind of looks a little bit like Jason Tatum, big forward, a guy that can shoot off the dribble, but can do all these different versatility things to help a team. I was just really impressed through this entire tournament. I had to root against him against Arizona, so I actually ended up watching him a little bit more than I expected to in this tournament. But his like just presence on the floor, the confidence that he carries, the pace that he plays with, the way that he seems to kind of be doing things on his terms and not allowing himself to get disrupted by what's happening around him. You made a good point about the layups. He shoots a lot of like overhanded. It's almost like he's shooting a hook with his left hand right at the rim and like slapping the backboard. It's like, just turn that hand over and give yourself a little bit of touch. I think that'll come in time. But like, to me, all that stuff I'm not worried about, because I can tell that he's wired in a way competitively that will maximize whatever skill set he has. And all that stuff will have to get polished. But this is just, to me, a competitor that I would want to bet on if I was an NBA team.
I agree. I mean, any concern, like, that the stat on screen, 45.5% on layups in the NCAA tournament, like, you're just nitpicking when you look for flaws with Cooper Flagg. You're nitpicking, and considering his rate of improvement as a ball handler and as a shooter and the intensity and heart he plays with on defense and everything you hear about his work ethic and his ability to absorb information and the desire to get better, he'll get better at those left-handed layups in time.
Yeah, not worried about
it. Minor concern. He checks every box. It was a fun Final Four. We're going to talk some NBA, and we'll be doing that right after this quick break. All right, Jason, let's talk some NBA now, because things are getting pretty crazy right now in the Western Conference. 7 teams could finish with the 3 seed right now when you look at the seeding possibilities. And then 6 teams could finish anywhere from 4 to 8 in the Western Conference right now with just a handful of games remaining, Jason. It's pretty crazy. And I want to start off talking about the Rockets with you. In all likelihood, they're going to end up with the 2 seed. They're 20-7 ever since they lost 6 games in a row earlier this season, plus 7.7 net rating. That's 7th in the NBA over that stretch. They have wins against the Bucks and most recently the Thunder and the Warriors. Number 13 in offensive rating over the stretch, number 1 in defensive rating. And we saw one of the reasons why they're number 1 in defensive rating over this stretch with the performance of Amen Thompson. What he did against SGA on Friday, what he did against Stephen Curry on Sunday, looked like defensive player of the year caliber stuff, didn't it, Jason?
Yeah, I've been really fascinated by this idea of what makes Houston's defense so successful, because I found it really fascinating that Denver and LA went on the road into OKC and shredded their defense relatively recently in the last month. And I've been what's different to me about Houston's defense than OKC's defense, because there are these 2 really young, athletic defenses, right? And OKC has rim protection in the form of Chet. And I would argue Şengün's kind of the opposite of that. He's a guy that you can use as an entry point because they'll run more drop coverage with him. He's a guy that you can get at in space, right? But the big difference between Houston and OKC to me defensively is their wing athletes are big and strong. like really big and strong. Whereas with OKC, you can actually attack their smalls a little bit in the middle of the floor if you've got bigger forwards that can play make out of it, or a center like Jokic. And so I find that fascinating because I don't know if you noticed, of all the teams that have run drop coverage against the Lakers this year, the Rockets were the team that has done the most damage to them, held them to the 102 or whatever, 104, I think they held them to the other night. They have an ability to hold up against bully ball players that OKC's defense doesn't. And so it's kind of a layer of resilience there. Because like you talked about Steph, Amen Thompson did a great job on Steph. I thought Fred VanVleet did a great job on Steph. But I think it even goes deeper to where Jonathan Kuminga and Jimmy Butler weren't able to consistently compromise Houston's smalls in space, attacking mismatches. And so I think really that's the upside to Houston's defense relative to some of the other younger athletic defenses we see in the league. They're just, Amen Thompson's got length. Dylan Brooks can hold up in the ground game against bully ball against the biggest, strongest forwards in the league. Jabari Smith Jr. is like this athletic wrecking ball in a different way as like a rebounder and a help side defender. And like they just have more of a size imposition on the perimeter that I think is really difficult for a lot of these teams to deal with.
Sure. I mean, they, like you said, they're big at the forward spot, big at the wing spot, and that gives them so much flexibility. We see that with, Dylan Brooks, Jabari Smith, and obviously Amen Thompson, with the size and length and the intelligence that he has, this rare blend that makes him such a great defender. I mean, Friday versus OKC, SGA is 6'6". He's got size. He's super shifty, and he holds SGA below 50% from the field, only 2 free throws in the game. And I know that's not just Amen Thompson. There's other guys in that game as well, but blocks SGA late in that game with a little side dribble, mid-range fadeaway, tracking him with his arm up the whole time. And then that's after a full game of just harassing him. And then Sunday versus Steph, a different type of player, obviously one of the greatest off-ball guys that you need to always constantly pay attention to, and he's just tracking him the entire game. I'm watching that, and I don't remember every Stephen Curry game, but I'm watching that thinking, is this the best Steph Curry has ever been defended? Because it might be. I mean, Amen Thompson was attached to him by the hip. Green did a good job. VanVleet did a good job. Eason did a good job in limited possessions as well. And they have size at the wing. They have, as you said, size at the forward spot. And then we see this lineup with Steven Adams and Alperen Şengün with 2 bigs. They outscored the Warriors on Friday in 16 minutes, 41-36, with Adams and Şengün on the floor. Outscored the Thunder on Friday. And then the Warriors, they outscored them 17-12 in 9 minutes. So this lineup with Adams and Şengün, I looked this up earlier today because I was curious, like, how are they performing? Over the full season, they've played only 156 minutes together. But of the lineups with over 150 minutes together, hundreds of 2-man lineups, Adams Şengün is number 1 in the NBA in net rating. They outscore teams by 31.7 points per 100 possessions. That is number 1 in the NBA of every 2-man lineup. And so we talk about size at the wing and forward spot for Houston, but then they have this 2 big lineup that they can roll out there that has been absolutely dominant defensively. We saw it again over the weekend against 2 dramatically different types of opponents with Golden State and with OKC.
Yeah, well, and they can run some zone with that look. And I like how that kind of positions them in a way where they can use their size to cover area on the ground rather than having to cover area with their foot speed, which I think is a nice accommodation there. And then Şengün's just been like, Şengün has been this, like, I don't know what it's been like for you, Kevin, watching the league this year, but every once in a while, I would say about once a day, you're watching a game and you're like, wow, that dude's kicking that dude's butt. For one reason or another, this guard is killing this matchup, this center's killing this matchup, whatever it is. I can't tell you how many times this year I've turned on a Rockets game and I've been like, man, Şengün is killing this guy. Like these guys like literally can't handle him. Like it turns into like Şengün has a very in your face type of dominance where it's like the buckets he's getting are almost humiliating because he's going right through you and right around you, right at the rim over and over again. Like he went right at Draymond Green on a baseline drive in the Warriors game, where he got just that tiny bit of an angle and he dropped the right shoulder and just shucked Draymond off to go for that reverse on the right side of the basket. And it's like, there are a lot of guys who won't even try that on Draymond because they're scared of him or something along those lines. Şengün went for 50 in the 2 games, and then Steven Adams obviously brings the rebounding element to it, where he's just burying everything under the rim. And honestly, it's fascinating from the Warriors standpoint, because you talk to Warriors fans, they're not concerned about the small ball teams. They're not worried about the Lakers. I think the Lakers can play better against the Warriors than they did on Thursday night. But at the same time, the Warriors fans are more worried about size. They're more worried about teams that can do what Houston did to them, physically overwhelming them, than they are with, teams that try to space them out, if that makes sense.
Oh, and rightfully so. I mean, Şengün made the Warriors look small. First 2 buckets of the game, he has a spin move on Looney, who looked too slow, and then he's plowing through Draymond next time that he gets the ball, who looked too small, too short. And then right before the half, there was this play, and this is what happens sometimes with switching defenses. Gary Payton ends up on Şengün on a rebound opportunity, and Şengün just plows him underneath the rim, grabs the board, gets the putback layup, and it's like, okay, this dude is just a matchup issue for Golden State. And to be fair, he's a matchup problem for a lot of teams, as you said, because he even made OKC look small at times. He overpowered Chet on a few occasions on post-ups. He punished switches in that game. And, Şengün, for Houston, when it comes to the playoffs, they showed a lot in these 2 games. Like, they really looked tremendous. Come postseason time, everybody talks about Jalen Green as the guy that's going to have to prove a lot, and I think that's true. He's young, but Şengün as well, only 22 years old. He's going to have to prove a lot as well. But the size for Golden State, that's a thing, man. Like, I do think that could be an issue for them when you talk about the lack of size there. There are certain matchups where they just look small, I think, but at the same time, there's other matchups against the Lakers just last week where they're switching, the size becomes, a little bit less of a concern. So, like, what do you make of some of the ups and downs with Golden State that we've seen recently, Jason?
Yeah, I think that Golden State in general is a tough matchup for every team in the regular season on a night in, night out type of context because of the different style that they play. And they just play so fast, and there's so much off-ball movement, and there's so many spread pick and roll teams that you run into in the league. Or, like, for instance, I like the Laker defense handling OKC and funneling Shea's drives down the lane line into help and having their kind of rotations preset on the backside more than I like the blender of Golden State against them, because it can cause so many problems. I think that Golden State is a team that for 10 years has been playing that style, that let's spread you out with 5 smalls and let's switch everything and turn into who can create better shots with our small ball groups. I think they thrive in those settings. I think where you can run into problems with them is their best lineup right now is going to include Jimmy Butler and Draymond Green at the 4 and 5. And that with Pods or Gary Payton alongside Steph, you have 2 6'3" guys at the 1 and 2. And you got Moses Moody, who's a decent sized wing, who I think has actually done a really nice job in that role as the primary point of attack guy since the trade. However, he's not exactly the greatest and most difficult athlete to handle in the world. And so I think it turns into a situation where there's a certain amount of just vulnerability they have to teams that can bully them. This, by the way, is why, when I look at, we're going to talk Lakers in a little bit, when I look at the Luka situation from that Thursday night game, is the weird factor is how different does that game look if Luka really looks to punish the smalls for Golden State in a way that he didn't look to in that particular game. And so I think there's some vulnerability there, but at the same time it gets flipped. So one of the biggest problems that you can have dealing with Golden State is Steph coming off of high ball screens. And if he can attack in a game where he plays better, if he can get 2 on the ball consistently against Şengün in space and create those 4-on-3s. Same thing with Jokic. If he can get into some of these bigger teams, Zubats in a high ball screen, if he can get some of these teams into rotation more and make these bigs cover ground in space, just like they did for years and years when they were a better version of themselves, that to me is another side of that coin. I think it's easy after any regular season game to take like the Rockets game and be like, oh, look, bad matchup. And then look at the Lakers game and be like, oh yeah, great matchup. That could completely flip if Steph just does a better job against Houston and if Luka just does a better job in the Golden State game. So it's like a lot of that has to do with just how well you leverage your advantages.
Sure. And like you mentioned, if Steph had done a better job in that game, he goes 1 for 10. He only has 3 points. It's one of his worst games. As I said earlier, I'm watching that game. Has Steph ever been defended better in a single individual game? Now, the flip side of that is, okay, Steph has a poor game. Hield scores 20. He keeps it close-ish. Pods continues shining for them. He's been tremendous for them in recent months. 19 points, 6 and 4 as well. Draymond in that game, he's defended by Fred VanVleet for most of the game. 6 foot Fred VanVleet shut down. Jonathan Kuminga does very little. And then Jimmy Butler, only 7 shots, only 13 points. He had 4 meaningless points in garbage time of that game. And this is a perfect example, I felt, of why I said Butler isn't saving the Warriors. It's Steph and Draymond restoring themselves that has really turned the season around. Steph becoming a top 5 MVP candidate in a lot of people's eyes. Draymond becoming the defensive player of the year in his own eyes and a lot of other people's eyes as well. But Butler in that game, he's had some great moments. I don't want to take anything away from him with what he's done recently. He was also good last week against the Lakers despite not scoring a lot, but he hasn't taken over and dominated a game. He hasn't seized the game since game 2 of the 23 East Finals. Like, that's just the reality. It's been 2.5 years since he's done it. And that's where I look at it. This was an opportunity against the Rockets in a really big game to take over and dominate, and he didn't do it. And that's something Jimmy Butler's going to have to seize those moments come playoff time, because there's going to be another moment where Steph is not on or Steph is being taken out, and Jimmy Butler needs to show why they went out and got him.
Yeah, that's very well put. Like, the Jimmy coming in hasn't really reaped any sort of big picture benefit in terms of his individual upside yet. I think it's helped in a couple of ways. It's shortened the rotation and clarified the rotation in a lot of ways. It has also, I think, been a ceiling raiser in terms of like some of the work he's been able to do inside ceiling against switches, 2-man game with Steph, a little bit more reliable shot creation when Steph's off the floor. So I don't want to completely minimize the impact he's had while he's there. I mean, you mentioned it perfectly. Like, Steph and Draymond have just been better since the deal because now they believe in the team because of the deal. However, there's a additional upside they can get to here if Jimmy actually starts to be what Jimmy used to be. It's entirely theoretical at this point because it's been so long. But I mean, here's the thing. If Steph plays like he's been playing before the Sunday game, after the deal, and if Draymond can keep this up and Jimmy does get to that level, that's where this becomes really scary in terms of what they're capable of in the late rounds of the playoffs. And the upside there is similar to the Lakers. I think the Lakers and the Warriors have a lot of room to potentially improve between now and like a early May or late May series potentially. It's just, there's also the flip side of that, to where let's say that Golden State catches Houston in the first round because they end up dropping to 7 and they win their play-in game, and you go into a first round series and Steph has a bad game in game 3 when the series is 1-1 or something like that. If Jimmy can't at that point leverage himself to help the team, they could be looking at an early exit, and that's where it gets scary. And part of that too is the Western Conference. Like, you could legitimately get an awful matchup in round 1 for no reason other than that's just how the cards fell.
That's the nature of the West right now and how tight things are at the moment. Like, it's just crazy how close all these series are right now. And I think you outlined the upside of the Warriors very well with, there's 2 sides of the coin with their size and how it presents advantages for them. And then there are some disadvantages for them. And we saw the advantage with what they did against Lakers and Luka last week. The Warriors switching defense showed the worst of Luka, and then against the Thunder switching defense, we saw the best of Luka. What would you say was the difference between those 2 games from the Lakers side?
The Steve Kerr and Mark Daigneault both made adjustments to their base defensive coverage to deal with the specific Laker matchup, which is basically that since the Luka trade, they've annihilated every team that's run a drop or an at the level type of traditional pick and roll coverage. And they've really, really struggled against switching. And the main reason why they've really struggled against switching is they've never had LeBron and Luka both going at the same time. In the phase right after the deadline, LeBron was going, but Luka was a shell of himself. His shot making was just non-existent. Then LeBron gets hurt. Luka came just came on super strong in that phase and got his shot making going, and then
he's
LeBron
averaging
came
like
back.
30, like the whole past month, pretty much. Great efficiency. He's back. He's back to being Luka besides that Warriors game.
Exactly. And so the most exciting part about the Thunder game, because you got to take some of the Thunder game and set it aside. The Lakers got over 1.5 points per jump shot. That's outrageous. So like some of that you got to set aside. Like I think the Lakers can beat the Thunder in a playoff series, but I don't think they're going to beat them by 26 4 times and sweep them out of the playoffs. So like it's more complicated than just that. That said, that Thunder game was the first time we got all three. We got the Laker defense from before LeBron's injury, which was LeBron flying around like Draymond on the back line as a helper and a communicator, and everybody flying around in rotation and just them looking like a great team defense, right? Also, Luka devastating matchup attacking, LeBron devastating matchup attacking. You need those last two pieces for this team to be good against switching. And so a lot of it, like you saw in the Warriors game, same sort of thing. Kerr's going to run a lot of drop with Post and Draymond. And D'Angelo runs a lot of drop with Chet and Hartenstein at times, right? They can also switch. Both teams will also switch, but they also run a lot of drop. They ran a ton of switching against Luka. In the Warriors game, Luka could not score against switches in that game. And so he was never able to compromise the defense to the point where he could get them in rotation and generate catch and shoots. All of a sudden in the game on Sunday against the Thunder, Luka comes out like, Hartenstein, come here. I'm scoring on you over and over and over again. Suddenly now they're having to blitz or linger with two on the ball. Now you're getting those advantages. They did a good job too. This is a mistake they made in the Boston game a while back. Instead of just focusing only on attacking bigs, attack the smalls in the middle of the floor. A lot of Luka, LeBron, high post ISOs against Kason Wallace, Alex Caruso, Isaiah Joe, right there in the middle of the floor. That's where they can be aggressive with their size advantages. And so I think like my ultimate thought coming out of that game was it was the reminder that the Lakers certainly can win the conference. It's just like anybody else in the West, they have their flaws, they have their inconsistencies. And so I kind of came out of that weekend feeling like anybody can win the West. I don't know about you, Kevin, but I was like any one of these teams could do it. I mean, the Wolves have won 14 out of 17. The Clippers are red hot. The Warriors are red hot. The Lakers are red hot. Like the Rockets are red hot. Anybody can win this thing.
Yes, that is how I feel. You can make an argument for basically anybody besides Memphis. I just don't think you can fire your head coach with 9 games remaining and have all this dysfunction that you have and your defense be as bad as it's been this whole 2025 calendar year. I have a hard time making the argument for Memphis of those top 8 currently, but Minnesota, you can make the argument. Golden State, you can. The Clippers, you can. The Nuggets, you still can because of Jokic with what he's capable of doing, but their defense, we'll talk about Denver a little bit later. But with the Thunder, they're still at the top, and they're still the favorite. We did see one of the potential flaws, I thought, on Sunday. You mentioned the Lakers. They shot the hell out of it. That's one of the reasons why they blew them out. But the mid-range, Luka over Wallace, LeBron over Caruso, LeBron over Isaiah Joe. The Lakers, we talk a lot about their size on defense. They don't have a true big, but they have Jared Vanderbilt, they have LeBron James, they have Luka, they have Rui Hachimura. They have a ton of big guys, size and length and versatility. That size also was apparent on offense, though, with the way those guys shot over those smaller Thunder defenders. So that was one of the things that was apparent to me in that game as well. And so for OKC, they got beat by the Lakers. They got beat by the Rockets. I asked Haberstroh on Friday. They had 64 wins, six games ago. I said they still have a chance to win 70, third team in NBA history. Tom's like, I think they're going to do it. Well, two losses in a row, not happening. So we've talked a lot about OKC throughout the show, Jason, with some of the different concerns with them. But one thing we haven't hit with the Thunder, and this has been my lingering concern really the entire season, is it's not the size, with the Lakers abusing it. It's not SGA with the drawn fouls, and obviously he didn't draw any on Sunday. He only drew 2 on Friday. It's not the 2 big lineup with Isaiah Hartenstein and Chet Holmgren. It's the second scorer behind SGA. That's my concern. Number one concern with OKC. Per synergy, Chet Holmgren is 8 for 22 on isolations and post-ups, 36.3%. Low usage and low efficiency. Jalen Williams, 39.6% on isolations. That ranks in the 61st percentile, average efficiency. J-Dub, Chet Holmgren, somebody needs to step up behind SGA as that number one guy, potentially the MVP. That's still my number one concern for OKC.
Yeah, and you can actually see Shea sometimes lose faith in those guys. And it manifests in these weird strings where in an 8 possession span, he'll take 6 pull-up mid-range jump shots. Because you can literally tell he's me taking something off the dribble here is the best we've got. And I actually think that works against Shea a little bit sometimes, because I think the game plans are set up in a certain way a lot towards the Thunder, where they're trying to force Shea into having high assist totals, beat us with the pass. We're like the Laker game plan. We're going to funnel you towards the sideline. We're going to have a helper waiting right outside the block. As soon as you beat that guy off the dribble, he's going to immediately start rotating. We're going to pack the paint and offer these mild contests to these weak side kickouts. In those situations, I think you're going to see a lot of games in the postseason where Shea takes, 26, 27, 29 shots because J-Dub doesn't have it, because Chet doesn't have it. And really that's it. This is the 3rd best offense in basketball. So it's really easy to talk yourself into they're just great. And when you look into the cleaning the glass numbers, they're good in the half court too. So you can't just say that they're a transition team. They're not. They're an effective scoring team in the half court. They are really smooth with their cutting and their spacing, and they have so much rim pressure that they can bring to the equation. It just weirdly manifests in these super ugly offensive games, typically in high leverage moments. It's in a big game that everyone's watching when you're playing against a really good team towards the top of the league, that they just sometimes will just fall apart offensively. And so I think that's part of it. I also think there's a certain amount of vulnerability they have to perimeter size. I think because they're interior guys, Chet and Hartenstein aren't necessarily the guys that are going to throw everybody around like rag dolls. They're not exactly Zubats, Jokic, these huge body front court guys. Because of that, they can't really inflict any sort of size related problems for anybody. And if they run into teams that have, whether it's the Clippers with the Kawhi Leonard, who's going to similarly have matchups that he can attack, whether it's a LeBron James and Luka, whether it is a Jokic or a Zubats, I think they have some vulnerability to size and strength. And I think that we've seen, even Houston to a certain extent, like you talked about with Şengün, I think there's a certain amount of vulnerability they have to size and strength.
Sure. I think that's true. And at one point this season, I felt the team that was number one equipped to take down OKC was Denver. I don't know if that's so true anymore. They've lost 4 games in a row. Jamal Murray's iffy for the start of the postseason, but they still have Nikola Jokic. 61-10-10 versus Minnesota, 32-12-9 versus Golden State, 41-15-13 versus Indiana. All in at losses. It's crazy. Jokic is still this dominant force, but Denver just does not have the support around him. Murray out right now. Their defense is horrific. Is their defense so bad that they're not quite finals contenders, Jason?
Everything about NBA history and everything about my belief and my beliefs surrounding the game of basketball tell me that this team is destined to a first or second round loss, and that, quite frankly, they're not capable of winning it all. They are so bad on defense, Kevin. It is beginning to be a little bit embarrassing. It's starting to look a little bit like letting go of the rope.
What makes them so bad?
I think this team relies on Jokic more offensively than previous iterations of the team. I think some of the early season inconsistencies with Jamal Murray, the loss of having Kentavious Caldwell-Pope as another off-screen threat, some of MPJ's inconsistencies, I think they lean on Jokic a ton. As a result of that, I don't think he has the bandwidth in terms of energy to be as active on defense as he can be. And there was a version of this team in the past where Jokic used to come up to the level of ball screens and be super active with his hands and very anticipatory and disruptive. And he would make that kick out pass or that skip pass a little more difficult or a little more looping or a little more deflected or whatever it might be. And then as a team, they were so much sharper in their backside rotations. And what has happened in this latest iteration of the team, they are, since January 23rd, I believe, they are a 120 defensive rating with Nikola Jokic on the floor. Like that's brutally bad. And part of the reason why is Jokic is coming up to the level. He's not being active with his hands at all. He's basically just being a placeholder up there. The ball handler, in the case of yesterday's game, Tyrese Haliburton, is just making a simple read, whether it's a kick back to the pick and pop big or it's a skip pass to the guy after they tag the roller, whatever it is. The simple uncontested pass, if that makes sense. And then the backside rotations aren't there. And so I think there's actually, Kevin, a big picture conversation to have if the Nuggets need to reconfigure their entire team construct around Jokic with more of a defensive focus, because he has shown the ability to take athletes and turn them into useful offensive players. Look at what he's done with Peyton Watson and Christian Brown as like a transition weapon, as a cutting weapon. And I think Aaron Gordon's development as a three-point shooter is like gigantic for the potential big picture build of this team, because I think you could opt for more of a defensive-minded 2 and 3 as a result. But like, I think it's so bad that it's worth considering blowing up with how bad they look defensively. Kevin, I don't know how they're going to get
blowing
stops
up
in the postseason.
Including like Jokic, or blowing up around Jokic and still trying to make it
blowing up around Jokic.
Around him.
I think I'd consider. I would be like, Gordon's my 4. Everything else is up for discussion. That's
Gordon
where I'm
being
at.
the 4. I'm interested there because of what they did in last year's draft. Like, I'm not going to say a late first round pick who just ruptured his Achilles in Summer League, sadly, is going to change the fortunes of the future of the Nuggets. But I think that front office drafted Day'Ron Holmes with the vision that A, they need a better backup than old man DeAndre Jordan behind Jokic, but B, to have the ability to play with 2 bigs. Because with Day'Ron Holmes at Dayton throughout his career, he became a super switchable big man. And he's going to be 22 years old next season. Hopefully he's able to come back from that ruptured Achilles and be, close to his prime athletic self. But I think that was part of signaling what they want to be able to build moving forward, as more versatility in that front court, where sometimes Gordon can be your 3, sometimes he can be your 4. And maybe that's part of the vision that Denver front office had with drafting Holmes, because you're right, as currently constructed, this team, I have a hard time coming up with arguments for them to be a true finals threat. And that's despite Jokic.
It's Jokic. That's the only argument.
That's it. That's literally it. That's it. That's literally it. And then you have this Murray injury. Murray's been way better in the second half of the season compared to the first half, when he looked out of shape, just was nowhere close to his prime self. And now you have Michael Malone, their head coach, saying he's questionable for the start of the postseason. Like that was your second argument. Okay, Jamal Murray becoming his prime self, or even better. That was the second argument. So, if you don't have him, man, like we saw what Indiana did to them. Indiana just shredded them in every single way, and Indiana does that to a lot of teams. Indiana's been terrific for the last 4 months now, basically ever since the NBA Cup. Haliburton got off to this horrible start. Halliburton's been great ever since early December, but what Indiana did, more teams are going to be able to do in the postseason. So I have very little faith in those Denver Nuggets, Jason, sadly. But I think you talk about trading Jamal Murray or trading Michael Porter Jr., being willing to trade them. I mean, who's going to want them at that big salary number? That's the flip side of it. Like, even if you are willing to trade them, what are you going to get? Probably parts, multiple pieces is what you'd be angling for if you're the Nuggets.
I had a listener pitch in my comments on YouTube one day Jaden McDaniels for Michael Porter Jr. Who do you think says no to that deal? Obviously, there'd be some complications, but just in terms of in terms of principle, what would you say?
I mean, we'll see how the postseason goes for Minnesota with what they're lacking, but I do imagine Michael Porter in the corner banging those threes instead of McDaniels being up and down. That's be hard to say no to if I'm Minnesota. And for Denver, it would make a lot of sense. I'm into that idea. I am into that idea, but at the same time, I think Minnesota, if they're indeed really going to go after KD, and if the Suns don't care as much about getting draft picks back, McDaniels plus Naz Reid and one of their talented young guys, Dillingham maybe. If KD tries to force his way to a team and team up with Anthony Edwards, second round loss from Minnesota, whatever it ends up being. If I'm Minnesota, I'd rather Kevin Durant than Michael Porter Jr. But MPJ would be a pretty good consolation prize for Minnesota. I like that idea. I'm into that idea. But I want to talk about Indiana. I thought that Denver game, among basically every game, I just love how they can attack you in so many different ways. Whether it's Halliburton just dominating at pick and roll, Nembhard, Nesmith attacking closeouts, Pascal Siakam as a creator or as a screener for Halliburton. They're one of the best two-man combinations when Halliburton's running the pick and roll and Siakam screening, but Siakam can run it as well. Indiana's versatility on offense, I mentioned earlier, since the NBA Cup, they've been great. Number 5 in offensive rating since then, number 10 in defensive rating. That combines to have the 5th best net rating since then, 3rd in the East behind Boston and Cleveland. But behind Boston and Cleveland, is Indiana the next best threat in the Eastern Conference?
Oh, that is such a good question because there's this weird, interesting thing happening in New York, which is OG Anunoby is like finally turning into Kawhi Leonard after we all said he was going to. I think we all said it enough times, it finally manifested and now it's started to show up. But, I'm incredibly impressed by Indiana. I loved you talked about the versatility because there was like this kind of fun stretch in the early part of the third quarter where Indiana through Halliburton and Turner just cut them to pieces over and over and over again. But in that late third quarter, Denver started, I don't know, maybe their pride kicked in or what it was, but they started throwing some more closeouts and started making some more of those rotations. And I was so impressed by like Obi Toppin and Nesmith and Nembhard both had like 2 each of these like nasty snatchback dribbles where they would like rip the closeout, get down to the elbow, the defender's right there, but then it's snatchback dribble behind his back, a little 10, 12 footer that they just are comfortable making. And that to me is such an important part of playoff scoring is like you face the good defenses, you can get them in rotation, but you're not going to get wide open catch and shoot threes and layups often. You're going to have guys that can create their own shot. I think Miles Turner's aggression as a shooter is really important too because I think there's a fine line between a big that can make a shot and a big that like aggressively and confidently is looking for threes. That 28-footer or whatever he hit on the left wing in crunch time last night was a classic example of that. He saw Jokic sitting way back and he had a catch and he was just like, hey man, I can shoot this too. And he took it from way out there. I think Siakam brings you just that little bit of like, oh, we're facing more of a switching scheme. We need to attack in a different way type of approach. But Halliburton to me is like the ultimate read maker. Like no matter what defense you're in, he's going to find the guy you're shading off of. He's going to find where the opening is. And from there, it's just a great combination of advantage extenders and play finishers, guys that can drive closeouts and guys that can finish plays. And they tie it all together into that offensive chain. And then, on the defensive end, it's the ball pressure. They trusted Miles Turner in a lot of single coverage situations on Jokic. Don't get me wrong, he got some buckets handed to him, but he also won some of those battles. I think Turner over the years has always given Jokic just that extra 10% of discomfort relative to some of the other bigs that he faces in the league. I will be honest with you, I don't think they're good enough on either end of the floor to beat Boston. But like Cleveland Sneaky has been a team that that has been 14th in defensive rating and 23rd or something like 22nd in defensive rebounding percentage since early January. And so they're a team that I think is not quite as sharp as they were in the early part of the year. So I wouldn't be surprised if a team like New York or a team like Indiana like unseated them in a certain type of way. But I wouldn't view either of those teams on the same tier as Cleveland as a threat to Boston, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think with Indiana, look, Cleveland has been closer to average than all-time great like they were at one point of the season. And I hope we see Cleveland fix themselves completely by the postseason, or at least by the Eastern Conference Finals, if they're still there, to face Boston for what would be a tremendous series. But right now, the faith has wavered a little bit with Cleveland, whereas with Indiana, I'm not picking them in a series over Cleveland, but Indiana has been tremendous for 4 months now. And so with Indiana, they're trending up. They're performing well heading into the postseason. The Knicks just got Brunson back on Sunday. And over on X, over this past weekend, I asked Knicks fans, what have you noticed about the Knicks during this long stretch without Jalen Brunson? And hundreds of replies about, OG Anunoby. He is legit. He needs to be getting more touches. He's more than just a catch and shoot guy. I thought what Ronnie said was spot on, where he said OG Anunoby is a legitimate scoring option, not just a catch and shoot guy. If that continues to be it will be a huge advantage for the Knicks. Joel Rodriguez brought up how that can push Brunson to off ball. His catch and shoot three movement off ball can be more of a threat. And that's all true. But I still think the big thing is with the Knicks, they got to run their offense in the fourth quarter. It can't just be Jalen Brunson over and over and over again. When you have OG Anunoby looking like Kawhi Light, Mikal Bridges running more offense himself as well during that stretch without Brunson, Thibodeau was almost forced to learn, oh, wait a minute, I have more options than just Jalen Brunson. And so I hope for the Knicks they continue leaning into that come postseason time, because maybe it ends up a blessing in disguise that they missed all this time without Brunson, Jason, because I was impressed with what we saw with OG, and especially on that game on Sunday where he looked dominant again with Brunson's return.
I think that the way you put it, like it forced Tibbs to be aware of OG is perfect, because I also think it forced the team to be a little bit more cognizant of winning on the margins. All year they've been at their best when they've been a defense to transition team, when they force turnovers and they get outgoing on the open floor. And that is a part of their game they've leaned so much more on since Brunson went out, because they've had to. They've been a better defense team. They've been forcing more turnovers. They've been getting out in transition more because they've needed to. And what's frustrating about that is from the beginning, we talked about the Knicks team as like, you need to be what you were in the postseason last year, butt kickers first. Like, you're winning the physical battles first. You just brought in Mikal, and OG as like ceiling raisers for your half court offense when things bog down. But they have to be a team that physically dominates you as well. OG Anunoby, like he's always had an incredibly reliable catch and shoot part of his game. And I feel like that's manifested in some of his off the dribble shot making too, where, he hit a couple tough off the dribble jump shots yesterday too, in the mid range and from like well beyond the 3-point line, where you can tell it's just the same strong base, strong lift. Even his release looks a little bit like Kawhi, where he'll get a little squirrely when he's contested, where like he'll flail his arms around a little bit or something. There's so many similarities between the two of them, because they both are just so big and strong that there's just a little bit of like a lack of fluidity sometimes compared to of their more like, polished peers, so to speak. But it's such a deadly piece of shot making when it's there. But the stuff that's impressed me the most with OG has been the to the basket game. Like, He has finally realized that, like, if he gets a tiny bit of an angle and he shoots the gap, none of these dudes can keep him in front. They're finding out that, like, when they catch that right shoulder or that left shoulder as he's shooting the gap, they're going flying off of him. He had a dunk yesterday where he like just bumped the dude off with his left shoulder and went up and dunked it in his face. I think it was Ryan Dunn, if I remember correctly. And he just has this strength. It's not that he realized it.
It's because Sunisa Lee was sitting courtside. That's why.
Yeah, I saw that.
You saw that clip? Was that funny? There's this great, for people who were listening that didn't see it on social, there's this great edit someone put together of like Sunisa Lee, Olympic gold medalist in gymnastics, sitting courtside and OG Anunoby kind of side-eyeing. And that's what inspired him to realize he could do all these things on the basketball court.
I loved how aggressive he was with Brunson coming back too. Yeah, no, exactly. I can't blame him. The Brunson was back. Brunson played 30-something minutes in that game, and like they just, I bet you there was some sort of conversation behind the scenes that was kind of half like, hey, we want Jalen to ease his way back, but also like, hey, like, OG, this is a new thing we found. And we don't want you to just stop doing this thing you're doing just because Jalen Brunson is back. Like, I'd argue if you go back to the last game Jalen Brunson played, which was that Lakers game, it was too much Jalen and not enough of anybody else. And that was a huge part of
down the stretch. Oh my God, it was so frustrating.
And like, don't get me wrong, he scored a lot, but the team didn't. And that's ultimately where this team needs to tilt more towards, is like, you need to have more variety. Variety breeds resilience. And I think OG just brings that through his matchup attacking, his strength, his rim pressure, and even a little bit of shot making.
Yep. I think you said it perfectly there, Jason. They need variety, and hopefully Tibbs sees the light and carries us into the postseason, because if they push Brunson off ball, who has been an elite off ball shooter ever since he was in Dallas, ever since he was at Villanova for that matter, Brunson has always been a great off the catch guy. If they can get him moving off ball, cutting, moving off screens, getting open and beyond the arc, and then other guys are able to get going as well, it just adds a new dimension to this Knicks offense that they're going to need in a series against Boston, who similarly can attack you in so many different ways with so many different guys, or against Cleveland, same thing there. So for the Knicks, I'm hopeful, Jason, that we see that come postseason time. But man, thank you for joining me today, man. This is a hell of a lot of fun. I don't think we had as much fun as OG Anunoby did on Sunday. So.
I love hater report too. It's so funny.
Oh, I know. Yeah, post on screen. So good, Jason. Thanks for joining me today to talk about the title game and a bunch of NBA. People can find yourself where? Let us know.
On Twitter _JasonLT, wherever you get your podcasts, or on YouTube, Hoops Tonight. Kevin, you're one of my favorite people to talk hoops with. This was a blast, and I'm looking forward to next time.
Likewise. Hopefully, you and I see each other in July at Sphere for the Backstreet Boys. Big thank you to Jason for joining me today. Thanks to Mike and Stone for producing. Thanks for listening. Have a great rest of your week. We'll be back again on Wednesday with a special show, and we'll be back again on Friday as well. So stay tuned for those.